The first thing I noticed was that my wife had stopped looking at me when she talked about the babies. Not the twins. Not yet. Just the babies, like everyone else already understood something I didn't. Her phone stayed face down beside her coffee every morning. She checked it whenever she thought I was in the shower. And when I walked into the room, she'd lock the screen without saying anything. I had spent 12 years married to a woman named Claire, so I knew her small habits better than I knew my own. That week, every habit was slightly wrong. I was home between assignments with my army unit, trying to enjoy what was supposed to be a quiet month. Instead, I found myself watching my wife carry around a secret she seemed terrified I would notice. One afternoon, I saw a hospital envelope sticking out of her purse. She pulled it out before I could read the name. "Just paperwork," she said. I nodded. I didn't ask. The strange thing about being lied to is that sometimes the lie itself isn't what hurts. It's realizing how long someone has practiced saying it. That night, while Claire slept, I sat alone at the kitchen table and looked at the wedding picture hanging across from me. Then I noticed something in the photo I had never paid attention to before. My stepbrother was standing directly behind her. And Claire had been holding his hand. I didn't wake Claire that night. I just went to bed and stared at the ceiling until the alarm went off. By breakfast, I had already decided not to accuse anyone of anything. That was how I had learned to survive in the army. You don't react to the first thing that looks wrong. You observe. You wait. You make sure you're not building a story around one bad detail. Claire came downstairs 20 minutes late. She was wearing a sweatshirt I hadn't seen before. "New?" I asked. She looked down at it. "Yeah. My sister gave it to me." Her sister lived 3 states away. I didn't say anything. For 12 years, Claire and I had wanted a child. We had gone through appointments, tests, medications, and more conversations about timing than I could remember. Eventually, we stopped talking about it because every conversation ended the same way. Silence. Claire had always blamed herself more than I ever did. So when she started talking about babies again, I thought maybe something had changed. Then she mentioned my stepbrother, Daniel. She said he had stopped by to help move some furniture. That made sense. What didn't make sense was why she couldn't look at me while saying it. Later that morning, I found 2 coffee mugs in the sink. One was mine. The other had a lipstick mark on it. Claire didn't wear lipstick. I stood there for a few seconds, then washed both mugs and went to work. I wasn't ready to know the truth, but I was starting to suspect it had already been sitting in my house. The next morning, Daniel called me. He asked how long I was staying home. "Not sure," I said. There was a pause. Then he asked if Claire was around. I looked toward the kitchen. She was standing there with her back to me, rinsing a plate that was already clean. "No," I said. Another pause. "Okay," Daniel replied. "Just wanted to check." He hung up before I could ask why. That bothered me more than the call itself. Daniel and I had never been close, but we weren't strangers either. Our parents had married when we were teenagers, and we'd spent enough holidays together to know each other's voices. That afternoon, I checked the family calendar. Claire had erased 2 appointments from the previous week. I opened the trash folder on the shared tablet and found a grocery receipt. Crackers, ginger tea, prenatal vitamins. I stared at that list for a long time. Claire wasn't pregnant. At least she had never told me she was. When she came home, I watched her put the groceries away. Her hands moved quickly. "Everything okay?" I asked. She smiled. "Of course." I nodded. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Whatever she saw made the smile disappear. She stepped outside to answer. I didn't follow. Instead, I opened the drawer where we kept old medical paperwork. Our fertility records were still there. And one envelope was missing. I knew exactly which one. It was the one with my test results. I waited until Claire left for work before opening the filing cabinet in my office. Years ago, I'd scanned every medical document we received during fertility treatment. It was a habit from the army. Keep copies. Never rely on one file. My test results were still there. Normal. Every number. Every note. The specialist had written one sentence that stayed with me. No male factor infertility detected. I read it 3 times. For 12 years, I had believed we simply hadn't been lucky. Now I wasn't sure what I had actually believed. That afternoon my phone rang. It was Claire. Her voice sounded nervous. "Can you meet me at the hospital?" I asked why. She hesitated. "They're releasing us today." I drove there without asking another question. When I walked into the maternity ward, Claire was sitting in a wheelchair with 2 newborn twins asleep in matching blankets. Daniel was standing beside her. His hand was resting on the back of her chair. The nurse smiled when she saw me. "Oh good. Dad's here." Before I could answer, Daniel quietly stepped back. Nobody corrected her. Not Claire. Not Daniel. Not even my own mother, who had arrived a few minutes later carrying flowers. The silence inside that hallway said more than any confession could. I congratulated Claire. I smiled at the nurses. I helped carry the bags to the car. And during the drive home, I already knew what I was going to do. I just hadn't realized there was one more truth waiting inside my own house. I didn't ask Claire who the twins' father was. Not that night. I parked the car, carried the bags inside, and watched her settle the babies in the nursery we had painted 3 years earlier. It had been empty ever since. 2 cribs now stood where we had once stored boxes. I stood in the doorway and felt strangely calm. Maybe because the truth had already done its worst. Later, when Claire was asleep, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. I called the attorney I had used for my military estate documents. I didn't explain everything over the phone. I simply said I needed advice about a divorce and property. He told me what records to preserve. Bank statements. Medical records. Insurance documents. Messages. Anything showing ownership of our house and the money we'd put into it. I made copies and stored them somewhere Claire couldn't access. Then I checked our joint account. There were 3 recent withdrawals. Small amounts. Nothing dramatic. But each one had been transferred to an account I didn't recognize. I wrote down the dates. I didn't confront her. The next morning, Claire found me making coffee. "Are you okay?" she asked. I looked at her. "I'm tired." That was true. She nodded and walked away. I watched her disappear down the hallway. For 12 years, I had tried to protect our marriage from painful truths. Now I realized protecting myself would require something completely different. And before I left for my unit, I needed to know exactly how much of our life had been built on a lie. I spent my last morning at home doing something that felt almost ordinary. I made coffee. I packed my duffel. I checked the locks. Claire moved around the house with one of the babies against her shoulder. She barely spoke to me. Neither did I. Before leaving, I placed the divorce papers inside my desk drawer. I had signed them the night before. There was no speech planned. No confrontation. Just a decision. My attorney had already reviewed everything. The house would be handled through the proper process. The accounts would be documented. I wasn't going to punish Claire or Daniel. I simply wasn't going to keep pretending. Before I walked out, I stopped beside the nursery. Claire looked at me. "Are you coming back?" I looked at the 2 cribs. Then at her. "Not the way you expect." She didn't answer. I left the house with my duffel over one shoulder and the signed papers in my jacket. At the airport, I turned my phone off. When I landed near my unit, I checked it once. 7 missed calls. 4 from Claire. 2 from my mother. 1 from Daniel. I didn't return any of them. That evening my mother sent one message. "Please call me before you do anything else." I stared at it for several minutes. Then another message appeared. "There's something Claire never told you about the twins." I put the phone down. For the first time, I wondered if the truth I'd found wasn't even the worst part. I called my mother the next morning. She answered immediately. "Where are you?" "Near my unit." She went quiet. Then she said, "You need to listen before you make any decisions." I already knew what she was going to say. Still, I let her speak. She told me Claire had been seeing Daniel for months. Not casually. They had been planning a life together before the twins were born. My mother had known. That part hurt more than I expected. But then she told me something I hadn't considered. Daniel wasn't my biological stepbrother. Our parents had married when we were teenagers, but Daniel had been adopted into the family years earlier. I sat on the edge of my bunk and listened. My mother said the fertility clinic had records showing Claire had undergone another procedure before the twins were conceived. She wouldn't explain more. She said Claire had asked her to keep quiet. I didn't ask why my mother had agreed. Some answers don't make betrayal easier. After the call, I contacted my attorney again. I sent him every document I'd saved. He told me not to contact Claire or Daniel until he reviewed everything. So I didn't. That evening, Claire finally called. "I can explain," she said. I looked at the phone in my hand. For 12 years, I had thought the hardest part of losing a family would be losing the people in it. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing I had been grieving something that had never been mine to begin with. Then Claire whispered, "You don't know whose children they are." I didn't answer Claire's question. I asked her to send everything through my attorney. She started crying. I ended the call. A week later, the paperwork arrived. That was when the final piece became clear. The twins had been conceived using embryos created during our fertility treatment 12 years earlier. Claire had taken the embryos without telling me and had them transferred after our marriage had already fallen apart. Daniel wasn't the biological father. I sat alone in my apartment reading the report twice. Then I closed the folder. There was anger, of course. But underneath it was something quieter. Relief. For 12 years, I had believed my body had somehow failed the woman I loved. It hadn't. She had simply chosen to make one of the biggest decisions of our lives without me. The divorce was finalized months later. I didn't fight for the house. I didn't ask for revenge. I didn't contact Daniel again. I did, however, request legal recognition of my parental rights, and eventually began the process of meeting the twins. It was awkward at first. They were too young to understand anything. I wasn't trying to replace anyone. I just wanted the chance to know my children. My mother eventually apologized. I accepted it, but things between us never became what they were. Looking back, I don't think revenge was what I wanted. I wanted the truth to stop controlling me. And once I had it, I finally understood something I'd forgotten during 12 years of trying to save my marriage. Sometimes walking away isn't losing your family. Sometimes it's the first honest thing you do for yourself.